Welcome to the SEEK 2023 podcast, featuring some of our favorite podcasters, recorded live at the Spoke Street Media booth during SEEK 2023 in St. Louis. We hope these give you a glimpse of the energy and passion from the conference and help you in your faith journey. Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the All Things Catholic podcast. I'm your host, Edward Sri, here on location in St. Louis at the SEEK23 conference. It has been amazing being here with dozens of bishops, hundreds and hundreds of priests, and 17,000 young people here at the Dome downtown St. Louis. And I have two very special guests. First of all, every once in a while I have my dear wife, Beth, on the show. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, dear husband. Good to be with you.
And today we have a very special guest, someone that everybody knows. You know him from Ascension Presents. You know him from Bible in a Year. You know him from now the Catechism of the Year, which just launched. We have with us Father Mike Schmitz. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Great to have you back on the show, Father. Now, many people know Father from all these amazing things he does with faith formation. They know him from YouTube and podcasts. But most importantly, Father is a father. And I want to talk just a little bit about that before we get into our topic. We're going to talk a lot about what Father Mike does in marriage prep. If you're a young couple coming to Father Mike and marriage prep and the formation he offers, we're going to talk a lot about preparing for marriage, the beautiful sacrament. But before we get into that today, I want to just say a few words about Father Mike as a father. And I hear from many focused missionaries and students that are there at the University of Duluth, and how much he pours his life into them. He does so many things, touching people's lives around the world through social media, and it's incredible. But first and foremost, he's a father. And one story I'm going to just share, Father, is last year, we weren't able to be together the last 2 years for SEEK because of the pandemic and all, but we were doing SEEK online, and we had a gathering in Denver. There were about a little over 1,000 people there, and a lot of speakers were so excited, like myself. I was there in Denver, so excited to present and talk to real people and see their faces. It was amazing. But Father was invited to come and present there in Denver, but he turned it down. Why? Because he's a father, and he wanted to be with his students for SEEK back in Duluth. And I was very moved by that. A lot of us in Focus have talked about that, but that's just one of many stories about how you pour your life out into the people that God has entrusted to you first. I'd love you just to say a few words about your love of being a father for the students you serve.
Well, thank you for that. Well, the rest of the story is they said, well, in that case, can you come out early and record it ahead of time?
But still, you did record early, but it's, as you know, as a speaker, it's so much more exciting like this. I mean, we're looking out at hundreds of people here. It's fun to do it live,
yes, definitely.
In front of real people.
Because I remember, I did mine before the conference even started, but it was the last talk. And as I was watching everyone on stage, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was talking to an empty room, like, hello, everybody, da, da, da. And I'm like, they're all so much more amazing, and it all worked out okay. But I also was so grateful for Focus because you not only, it's one thing that, sometimes you have organizations that say, here's what we believe, here's what we value. And then when the rubber hits the road, they are like, well, what we really value is efficiency or economy or whatever the thing is. But Focus was like, well, in that case, would you come out early and pre-record your talk? We'll make it happen. And they just made it happen. So that's the organization that we're part of, and that's hopefully what we're part of when it comes to the church as well, which is that we live what we actually profess to live, which is, So that's what I have to say. Fatherhood. Sorry. Okay, also Dr. Sri. So years ago, we were out in Colorado, and Dr. Sri and I went on a little walk in the foothills, and he said, so, podcast, do you think I should do one? I'm like, Dr. Sri, yes, 100%. You need to do a podcast because the world needs to know the truth, and you speak it really, really well. And also to have your wife do it with you, it's amazing.
You're so kind, Father, and I still remember that conversation because many people for years have been saying, oh, you should start one. I was like, oh, I don't know, I'm busy. And it was our conversation really kind of a turning point just to kind of encourage me. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. So fatherhood.
Fatherhood, let's go back to that.
Sorry.
Yes.
Squirrel. So, fatherhood. Minnesota Vikings. So, Minnesota Vikings this last weekend lost against the Green Bay Packers. They got thumped. They got really trounced. but I saw my favorite t-shirt of all time. Because I'm a fair weather fan. When it comes to sports, I'm a completely fair weather fan because if they're winning, I want them to win. That's great. If they're losing, you're dead to me. I don't care about you. And I think that's fair because it's not like they're being loyal to me. Like, right, like if all the people who play for the Vikings, people who play for the Twins, they only play for my state because we pay them. And if someone else would pay them more money, they would play for them. So again, if you're like, no, I'm a diehard whatever's fan, like just, if they're a diehard, they'll never leave your state, then 100% cheer for them. Otherwise, I think it's smart to be a fair weather fan. So the t-shirt said, Minnesota Vikings, we almost always almost win. And I was like, yes. And I wanted to find a venue where I could share that t-shirt. Here it is. Fatherhood. So years ago, it's so funny you say this, that the first thing that is true is that fatherhood. When I was in seminary, actually even in undergrad, I studied theology just in a normal Catholic college, but in seminary especially, I remember they would tell us, they would say this again and again, they would say, you're not being ordained to be a sacrament dispenser. Like you're not ordained to just give the sacraments out. And I'm like, okay, but they never had a description of what we were being ordained to be or to do. And so the best they could come up with is, you're being ordained to have a ministry of presence. Like, okay, I guess, but you're not going to be a sacrament dispenser. That's not what priesthood is. It's kind of like a ministry of presence, but there was no thing that was captivating, no thing that was sufficient as a description of what is a priest. This is coming from the seminary. Now, seminaries are even better now. This was 20 years ago. They're better now. It wasn't until I was ordained for a bunch of years that one of my brothers, and I was even on campus for a bunch of years, one of my brothers in the priesthood was like, oh yeah, well, I'm ordained to be a father. And it was like all the lights came on. Because I'd been living like that for years on campus, because I get to be with college students every day. Like, this is not normal life, just FYI. Normal life is just like getting up and just being in students' lives. And I remember the day that I walked into our little Newman house. We just have a little Newman house with a little 2-car garage that's converted into a daily mass chapel. And I lived there. And so I walked in. One of our missionaries, her name is Tracy Kalesa. Tracy, I walked in the room and she's like, oh, hey, Dad.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, hi. And I just had to go into my room and just like cry. I'm like, that was something that just so many of those missionaries and students have embraced, like, oh, hey, Dad. And I didn't realize that is the heart of the priesthood. There's nothing more core to the priesthood than fatherhood. It's not, yes, but as a part of that is sacraments, right? Because what do fathers do? They provide, they protect, they heal, they feed. And that's what a priest is supposed to do through the sacraments. But also, you have to be present, or else you're an absentee father. And that's one of the big fears that I have a lot of times because of all the other stuff, whether that be a podcast or whether that be like going to a conference, is like, yeah, he's our dad. He's just not here a lot. And that's one of my biggest fears. And so that's one of the reasons why whenever I see our students, I'm like, you guys, I'm so sorry. I'll see you back at UMD. But
well, it's totally the same thing, right? In the home. So I'm traveling, I lead a pilgrimage, I'm here, and that's my biggest thing as well. And that's a constant conversation we have in our marriage with our spiritual directors. What am I doing? How much we can do? And there's different seasons when I can do a little more and seasons when I'm needed more at home. But that's my biggest fear as well, is I got some of my kids out here, and I don't want them to say, but Dad just wasn't there.
Yeah, exactly.
Dad wasn't around.
But you also work hard to make sure you get back in time for, say, Sunday Mass or Saturday night. Like, I don't know if you know this, my husband's a machine.
Yes, I do.
So he just goes and goes, but he has certain things like he will go extra to be home with us and for us, and it's really lovely.
I remember hearing Father Larry Richards years ago before I started traveling a bunch, and he said, one thing, he's always back by Saturday night for the weekend masses. So it's like, okay, that's it, then that's the deal. I'll never, ever miss a Sunday Mass. I missed one this last fall, because for the worst reason in the world. I was in a
Vikings?
I was in a CrossFit competition. And so I got a priest to fill in for me in the morning for the morning mass. But we didn't even podium. We didn't even get third place, like fourth. Anyways, it was fine. But it was still in town, so I got to be around.
Very good. Well, just a little bit about Father Mike's heart. Can I share one more story about your fatherhood? These are things that I keep hearing about, which is great. The last time we were all together for SEEK, it was in 2020, January, and it was down in Phoenix.
Yeah.
And again, Father Mike gives his keynote, and everyone's talking to him, which is great. And then most people would just fly in, fly out. You do the conference, and then you leave. What did Father Mike do? Afterwards, they rented an Airbnb or something, and you were there with all of your students for a couple of days.
It was awesome.
Did a little retreat with them.
Yeah.
And not only that, you're rolling up your sleeves. You're in there cooking pasta, cooking for all the students. I mean, like a dad. It really it is very inspiring to hear. And I think that's important because I want all the young people here, because I don't know if you get this question. I get this question all the time. How can I become a Catholic speaker? How can I become a Catholic, influencer? And, if God calls you to do these things, then that's great. But the most important thing, more than anything we do on a stage, more than anything we may do on a screen or on a podcast, it's being father. It's being present to the people, right, that God has put in your life. And on the last day, I know God's not going to, I go to my judgments, before God. He's not going to say, hey, that was really good what you wrote on page 72. That was a really nice YouTube video. No, he's going to ask me, was I a good husband? Was I a good father more than anything else? And I think that's relatable in the priesthood as well.
I think with John of the Cross, what does he say? He says, in the twilight of our lives, we'll be judged on love alone. And so that sense of does not matter. So many of the things that we use to judge or rank ourselves as being successes or failures will not matter at all. In the twilight of our lives, we'll be judged on love alone.
Number one podcast in the world, though. I mean, religious podcasts. Won't that get you a little further ahead?
This is not false humility. Just reminding myself of the truth. St. Paul said that, right? St. Paul says, I can speak in the tongues of men and of angels. If I don't have love, I'm nothing. And same thing. Here's the Lord Jesus. What does he say? He says that you come to him and say, Lord, Lord, did we not cast out demons in your name? He said, yeah, but I didn't do the will of my Father. I never knew you. And that's the reality for every one of us, right? There can be, and I know there's fruit that's coming out of these podcasts, which is amazing. But that's fruit of God. I'm just lending a voice because I didn't write a word of it, right? It's just like, and some people, hey, it's not my Bible. I'm like, I just want you to know, disclaimer, I didn't write this. But it's the power of God. But if you don't have love, it's literally nothing. It doesn't mean anything.
Amen. So speaking of love, we want to talk about marriage here today. And I would love to just get to hear, like, if this was a younger Edward Bestry, and we're going to come to marriage prep with Father Mike, what do you do? What do you walk people through when you're preparing them for marriage?
First, we'd have syllabus day. And the syllabus day, I have a checklist of all the things you need to make sure you've done. And they'll go through the whole list. Like, have you got a parish? Have you talked to the priest there? All these kind of pieces. And then say, tell me about your story. How'd you guys meet? I don't know if you want to do that. We could.
Well, that's a whole other podcast.
That would be the whole podcast.
And then once we get past syllabus day, then one of the things we'll do is I have lecture day. Syllabus day is first day, and then lecture day is the second day. The second day is I just present to them a Catholic theology of marriage. And that Catholic theology of marriage is basically to kind of get everyone on the same page when it comes to some of the three big buckets: marriage as a covenant, marriage as a sacrament, and marriage as a vocation. And so marriage as a covenant, one of the things we just want to affirm and assert more than anything else is that marriage is not a contract. So you probably heard people say things like, we don't need to get married because I don't need a piece of paper to prove that I love this person. And maybe you've even said that kind of thing. And the church will say, you're right, you don't need a piece of paper to prove that you love someone. That's a contract. And a contract is really good. A contract is super helpful. A contract is what? A contract is an agreement for an exchange of goods or services based off of a condition. So a contract is an agreement for an exchange of goods or services based off a condition. So if I need to re-roof the house, the contractor comes over, and there's a contract. And the contract says, give me this much money, I will re-roof the house, then you pay me this much money. Great. An agreement for an exchange of goods or services based off a condition. And the condition is, if you don't re-roof the house, I don't owe you money. And if you don't pay me the money, I won't re-roof the house. So if you don't do your part, I don't have to do my part. And that's the great thing about a contract is, again, agreement for exchange of goods and services based off a condition. And too many people go into marriage with that idea. Now, a lot of times people are deep, like these folks. You're deep, and you're like, so you might hear like the idea of like having a contractual approach to marriage, and you're like, no, I don't have that. Because the shallow version is, well, as long as you stay cute, I'll keep coming home. Like that's shallow. And it's like, no, I'm deeper than that. Okay, how about this deep? How about as long as you're kind to me, I'll be kind to you. As long as you're patient with me, I'll be patient with you. As long as you're faithful to me, I'll be faithful to you. And when we start getting to those places, then even deep couples are like, well, that's kind of where I'm at. Like, if they're not faithful to me, then I don't have to be faithful to them. If they're not faithful to me, this marriage is over. That's a contract mentality when it comes to marriage, because a covenant mentality is what God reveals to us in the Bible. And the covenant is, if a contract is an agreement for an exchange of goods or services, I'll do this for you if you do this for me, based off a condition. A covenant is an exchange of persons that's unconditional. Basically, God says, I'll be your God, you be my people. That's it. I'm yours and you're mine. And so when a husband and wife or man and woman stand before each other to get married, they're not saying, I'll do this for you if you do this for me. In fact, actually, my uncle used to work out in Hollywood before he passed away. He was, you know the TV show Full House?
Yeah.
So he was one of the writers for Full House.
Oh.
And Sister, he did that. He's got a couple different Hallmark Christmas movies. It's just awesome. Anyways, so, but he if you know, remember Full House, how like there's all one-liners, everything's one-liner. So he got married outside the church where he and his wife wrote their own vows. And so all of his vows were a joke. It was like, and Michelle, I'll do this if you do this, and I'll do this if you do this. And everyone's just laughing because it's super funny. And I remember laughing at the time too. I thought it was hilarious. But then realizing, oh, every one of his vows was a condition. Even though it was funny, even though it was entertaining, even though there's some meaning to it, every one of the vows was a condition. Versus when you get married in the Catholic Church, there's no condition. You just say, I, Jack, take you, Jill, to be my wife. And I, Jill, take you, Jack, to be my husband. I'm yours and you're mine. And to realize is that even if you walk away, even if you don't do the thing you said you would do, we're still married. Because you can't actually void a covenant. You can void a contract, but you can't void a covenant. And you know, Chesterton talks about this. Chesterton says, he said, people get so mad at the Catholic Church because the church forces people to promise forever when they get married. He says, but wait a second. That's what love wants to do. Like love wants to promise forever. So even if you weren't in the church, if you got married, you'd want to promise forever. Because love wants, so I always joke with our couples and say, it'd be like me saying, okay, here's what I have. I have the three different versions of the vows. I have the 3-year vows, the 7-year vows, and the forever vows. Now don't make any quick decisions. Just like pray about it, talk about it. Let me know which vows you wanted to give next time you come back. And if someone were to say, like, I like those 7-year vows, the other person says, well, I'm not here to give you my 20s. Like, that's not what I'm promising you, my 20s. I'm promising you either I want to love you for the rest of my life no matter what, or we need to go separate ways. Because that's what the human heart wants. And the crazy thing is, the human heart also wants what? Unconditional love. Where do you have the opportunity to actually love someone unconditionally? The promise that no matter what happens, I will love you unconditionally, without a condition. I can never void, no matter how badly you fail, it will never actually void my love for you. Sacrament of matrimony. And so the deepest desire of the human heart, actually, the church gives you a way to promise that and gives you a way to live that out.
Love wants to make a vow and have that total commitment, and love wants to be received. I want that other person to be committed to me. That's what we're longing for.
And the heavy part about that is then, even if that person walks away, even if, say, the other, it's a risk. It's a huge risk. Because the person who covenants themselves to you, they might just change their mind. And to realize that if they change their mind and walk away, you're still married. If they change their mind and walk away and get married to someone else, you're still married to them. That means that even if they walk away, you're not free to date. You're not free to pursue any other romantic relationship. You're a married person and your spouse happens to live somewhere else. And that's the heaviness, because the great part about it is like, oh my gosh, you're made for this. This is incredible. And this is the risk. But that's the part of it too, is that one of the things we realize, we keep accenting this, when it comes to matrimony. I don't know how many different weddings I've been part of where it's like, what you're watching is you're watching two people risking their entire future for this person sitting next to them. That's what's happening. Every time someone gets married, they're risking, they have no idea. They know that the person they're marrying is a flawed human being. They know the person they're marrying is broken. They know they're broken. And yet they're saying, if this doesn't work, nothing will work.
Yeah, and it's a big risk. You worry the other person could leave. But I think many Catholics could come together and go, I don't think the other person is going to leave. They have some confidence. But there's still a risk of this other person is going to hurt me.
Yeah.
This other person's going to let me down. This other person's going to make mistakes, and I'm going to be frustrated. And I think that's the reality of married life.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
And you're constantly being invited in those moments to actually love. So we just gave a talk on marriage earlier today, actually, and I shared a story. That I wrote Beth a letter recently. I left it on the pillow.
Yesterday.
Really recently.
Very recently, yeah. And one of the lines was, I just said, I was in prayer, and I just thought, I'm going to write my wife a letter here
He
this
doesn't
morning.
do that every day.
Yeah, this doesn't happen every day.
I wish.
But in the letter, I was just thanking her for a number of things. But I said, and I want to thank you for being so patient with me when I was so impatient with you. And I think that's something in marriage, going back to the contract thing. If marriage is a contract, it's like, well, I'll be kind to you if you're kind to me, and I'll be patient with you if you're patient. Well, I wasn't patient with my wife recently, and I apologized, but she was very patient in the way that she handled it. Like, she didn't just get, why are you being this way? She just came and was calm and just said, are you sure you want to? She called me on it, but in a very gentle way. But that's the real stuff of married life.
And the word vulnerable, which you're talking about, the vulnerability, it hit me recently. Like, you get back to the roots of that. Vulnus means to be able to be wounded.
Yeah.
So we like to praise vulnerability in our modern day, like, oh, be authentic, be real, be vulnerable. But you're vulnerable with someone, they can come in and hurt you even more.
Yeah.
And that's what you open yourself up to when you get the ring and say the vows. And one thing I like to compare marriage to is the roller coaster at Disneyland, Space Mountain. If anyone's familiar with that. Space Mountain is marriage, because you and your spouse get in that car and you buckle yourself in. You are there together, 100%, and you don't know where you're going because it's in the dark. The roller coaster in the dark, you could be going up, you could be going down, you could be going sideways, upside down. You don't know what you're going to hit in your marriage. You could struggle with infertility, hyperfertility, child with special needs. You could have a sick spouse. You could have greater tragedy. You just don't know when you make that vow to one another, when you're rooted in Christ, what journey your love is going to take you on. But that's the beauty of it.
It reminds me of that quote you often like to mention from St. Francis de Sales.
Yes. In marriage, one takes a vow, but it is the only instance where a vow is taken without a novitiate. Because if there were a novitiate for marriage, how few would enter into it?
Did he actually say that?
He actually said
amazing.
that. It's one of his letters.
That's great.
Yeah,
Because you're thrown into it, right?
Yeah.
And you have to, all of a sudden, you think you know the person, and you do to a certain level, but then you're thrown into this reality called marriage, and all of a sudden, all these other things pop up in the first months, in the first years, after a few kids, and it's like, whoa, this is a lot harder than we ever imagined.
One thing someone wrote in a card on our wedding day, which I have written many times, is the quote saying, the priesthood, which is analogous to marriage, has been more terrible and more wonderful than I ever imagined. Here's to you, you're terrible and wonderful.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Completely.
You don't know till you're in it.
I make the analogy a bunch of times when people are coming into the church. So a lot of times when people are RCIA, I don't know, is anyone here in RCIA right now? A couple of people, that's awesome.
Congratulations.
So what can happen sometimes is, as we're getting closer and closer to the Easter Vigil, is there's this like, I don't know if I'm ready. And I remember one year in our diocese, we had 7 men ordained to the priesthood, which is really big for the Diocese of Duluth. And I was backstage, went back to the sacristy to talk to some of these guys, and I was like, hey, so how you guys feeling? Are you ready? And are you prepared? And one of the brothers, he looks and he says, well, I'm sufficiently prepared. I thought, that's an amazing answer, because there is no way to be prepared. There's no way to be prepared for the priesthood. There's no way to be prepared for what God's calling you to as a Catholic. And there's no way to be prepared completely for marriage, but I can be sufficiently prepared. And that's part of what marriage prep is all about, is that, okay, there is going to be curveballs that I could never anticipate, but I'm sufficiently prepared to be able to take a swing.
Anything else you do in your
so
the syllabus, you have the class?
That was the beginning of covenant. We haven't gotten to sacrament and vocation there. And then, oh man, I love this thing called we use the focus inventory, which stands for Facilitating Open Couple Communication, Understanding, and Study. And so basically they take about 162 statements and say, I agree with this, I disagree with this, I'm uncertain. So my future spouse and I have discussed and agreed the way we'll make use of credit in our financial relationship, or something like this. And so we go through all of those, and that becomes kind of the skeleton for talking about big, big things. Because one of my favorite, I have a couple of favorite questions or statements. One is, there are certain behaviors and habits in my future spouse that sometimes annoy me. Super fun. I love that one. Because the preferred answer is yes. The preferred answer is agree. Like, yes, there are certain behaviors or habits in my future spouse that sometimes annoy me. And the organization wants you to say yes because it means A, the shine is worn off. Like, you know the person's not perfect. B, they know that you know that they're not perfect. And C, you're free to be able to say that.
Yes.
Because it's one thing to kind of like, I know you know, but don't say anything about this. Another thing to be like, yo, yeah, we can joke about this. So then I used to say, okay, so what is the thing about each other that you find annoying? And I don't do that anymore. What I do is I say instead, so what is it that you think Ted would say about you?
Ooh, that's good.
And that's better because they
really
get to
good.
own it themselves
Yes.
as opposed
Perfect.
to, let me get started, you know?
Right.
And they say, actually, that never bothers me. And not as much as this, you know. Anyways. But then the next question was potentially devastating. So the first one is kind of lighthearted. Certain behaviors or habits sometimes annoy me. The next question is, there are parts of my future spouse's character that I do not respect. And that one is just, whenever that's flagged, it's like, yes, I agree with that. It's like, okay. So I don't know if you accidentally said, but we just dive into it because you have to talk about this. Because have you guys heard of a guy named Dr. John Gottman?
Yes.
Dr. John Gottman, he's a therapist, a psychologist. He and his wife, he's studied couples to such a degree from a sociological perspective, but he's a Christian. He's studied couples so often, so much, so thoroughly that he says that he can identify, by simply observing a couple having a conversation for 15 minutes about anything, he can predict with 90% certainty whether or not they'll be divorced in the next 3 years. That's what he claims. Because what he would do is he'd take these couples and put them in an environment where they're kind of like away for the weekend, and he would strap on like EKG machines and blood pressure monitors, and just they know they're being monitored, and just have them live for a weekend. And he noticed these things. There were 4 behaviors that in these couples that he called the 4 horsemen, like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, because if they were present, that meant the end was nigh. And the first one is critique. There's different than criticism. Criticism would be like, I asked you to bring home the dry cleaning for the last 2 days. You promised you would, and you didn't do it. That's just legit criticism. Critique is, I asked you for the last 2 days to bring home the dry cleaning. You didn't do it. You don't care about anyone but yourself. That's like taking this particular, making a generalization. It's a big attack. The second is defensiveness. And there's 3 kinds of defensiveness, at least. There's the aggressive defensiveness. You didn't pick up the dry cleaning. Oh, yeah, well, you didn't do such and such. That's aggressive defensive. There is deflective defensive, which is you didn't pick up the dry cleaning. Well, you know what? I was so busy. I had this, this, and this. Okay. And there's also the worst one. I mean, I think it's the most insidious one, where it's the low-grade defensiveness. And maybe you've seen this. And this is one of those things where I always ask couples, because we've all seen it. It is the low-grade defensiveness is to watch a couple tell a story about like their weekend or about their Christmas or about their last vacation. Sometimes there's like or how you met. Like, oh, I was at the malt shop. I was driving my car and she was on the side of the road. No, you weren't driving your car. You were in a motorcycle. Oh yeah, that's right. I was on a motorcycle. Crazy. I can't believe I forgot that. Thank you for reminding me. And it's just fun versus I was driving my car and you didn't drive your car. It was a motorcycle. Why? Like, what? I'm telling a story, aren't I? Have you ever seen a couple, they're telling a story and you're just cringing the whole time because the correction is not happy. The correction is not like, oh yeah, thank you. It's, oh, why do you always jump in? That low-grade defensiveness is a sign of we don't trust each other. And there's this remarkable, because then I've seen this in my family a bunch. So speaking of the story, a couple Thanksgivings ago, we were flying down to celebrate Thanksgiving at my older brother's place in North Carolina. And so we came in at different times. I came in way ahead of my family, and there's a big snowstorm. And so I met them at the gate. I'm like, Dad, man, how was the drive? And he's like, no problem. It just went slow. And there was a car that had spun out in our lane right ahead of us. My mom stepped in. She's like, you didn't see that car. He's like, I didn't say I saw the car. He's like, yeah, well, you made it sound like you saw the car. And he's like, I didn't make it sound like I saw the car. And I just like, this is weird. But my dad just let it go. And we went on with the rest of the night. The next morning, this is what happens with this, though. What happens is the next morning, we're at this Airbnb, going to my brother's place after breakfast. My mom's sitting at the kitchen table, and we're all getting ready. And my dad's like, hey, we're going to go over to Mark's place now. She's like, I know. He's like, we're going to Mark's place now. I was like, wow, that went from 0 to 60. Oh, that was from last night. That was in the holster. That was in the chamber since the gate when we arrived, because this was the low-grade defensiveness where, okay, we're not trusting each other. And they're amazing. They've been married 56 years. But sometimes, right, sometimes it doesn't work out and perfectly. But there's aggressive defensive, deflective defensive, and low-grade defensive. The third is, so what do we have so far? Critique, defensive. There's also stonewalling. Stonewalling is, have you guys know what stonewalling is? I never got it for so long until I just kept reflecting on it and then saw it. Here's what stonewalling is. Stonewalling is, here's the guy, he goes to the little window and looks out, and he's like, oh, little bird out there. And his wife can either say, are you kidding me? Since when did you get into birds? She could say, I don't care about birds right now. Or she could just go, huh. Or she could say, wait, where? Right over there. Oh, okay. So stonewalling is someone makes a bid. And how you respond to that bid either is I'm acknowledging it or I'm just dismissing it. Stonewalling is just like this, So someone comes home and says, I had the worst day today. You think you had a bad day, da-da-da. So the person made the bid of saying I had a tough time, meet me down here. I'm not going to meet you down there. Or say I had an awesome day. Like, oh, really, was that good? Or just kind of like the worst is like huh. Because the bid is, hey, meet me up here, I had a great day. I'm not gonna. Stonewalling. The insidious thing about stonewalling is you can do it and get away with it. Like, why are you always like this? What do you mean, why am I always like this? I didn't do anything. Exactly. And so one of the things this resonates so thoroughly with our couples because they're like, oh man, I can see that. I didn't have a name for it, but I know that sometimes I'm just tired and she made a bid and I didn't want to meet her. Or I knew that I was distracted, he made a bid and I don't care about how the Vikings did. That kind of a situation. I don't care about, I get this a lot, like these women who are like, don't say another thing about Jordan Peterson. I don't care about Jordan Peterson. But the guy's like, Jordan Peterson's my man, and it's like, that's enough. He's making a bid though. Here's a thought I've been thinking about lately. I want to share it with you. If she just, that's Stonewall. And what's he going to do? I'm not going to share my thoughts with you anymore because you don't care. So critique, defensiveness, stonewalling. The fourth is the worst, and that's contempt. Now, I don't have to describe contempt because you all know it. The reality, of course, Gottman says is, and this is what we bring our couples through, all four are going to be present at some point just because we're broken. Like here's my mom and dad, 54 years. They're that Thanksgiving. We're broken. It's going to be, but he says, but if we can hit the golden ratio, and the golden ratio is something around 5-1 or 7-1, acts of kindness, love, respect to every one, stonewalling, critique, defensiveness, contempt, then you're going to still be happy. You'll still have health because there's enough trust here built up that like, yeah, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I trust you. I know you actually love me. I know you actually respect me because the 7-1 or 5-1, you're putting into the trust bank. You're putting into the love bank. And does that make sense? Sorry, I went on and on for that.
No, this is awesome. This is really great stuff.
This is literally what we talk about in marriage prep. So
it just reminds me, even in our marriage, there's times when we're really close, we're connecting really well, and then there's a stressful time just recently. And we're driving out here and kids are sick and it's hard. But I remember you saying something like, hey, we've been doing really well here, but you're getting a little stressed, Ted. And
well, it's like, let's stay in the same space, do not leave the building, let's bring it down, buckle it in. Can be a lot.
Yeah, completely. You're with each other all the time.
Right.
We were talking about being extroverts or introverts, and they said, Father Mike, are you an introvert or extrovert? I'm like, I'm 100%, not 100%, but very heavily introvert. And I need that. Sometimes you don't have a place to escape to. It's like, oof. Duh.
But what you're describing, going back to the four things that he mentions that you can fall, the horsemen, that you can fall into. Yes. And then how we want to have the ratio 7-1. That's just fascinating that, here is he's scientifically trying to...
Well, there's also people who will say that, 3-1's way too low. You need many more acts of kindness and trust and love. Mm-hmm. Also, I've heard a psychologist say, Jordan Peterson, say that 11-to-1 is you need more kickback. You need more tension, or else the other person's just a pushover, and you start to not respecting them because they're too much of a pushover. You need someone to contend with, he says. Now, that doesn't mean they always have to be acts of defensiveness or stonewalling or contempt, but it means there's some kind of person you marry to someone you can contend with, not simply someone who's just going to agree with everything you say and think that you're perfect. But go back to
this whole process, though, I think that's what the sacrament is doing.
Yeah.
It's changing our hearts to love like Jesus.
Point.
Jesus is not 3-to-1, 7-to-1, 11-to-1. He's infinite.
Yeah.
And it's perfect love. Now, none of us are going to get there in this lifetime, but grace really does change our hearts. We probably go into the marriages. A little as you get into it and things get hard, you may have moments where it is more 2-to-1, 3-to-1, or stuff like that.
Yeah.
But through the sacrament, God changes our heart to love like He loves on Good Friday, where He's patient when the other person is frustrating us, and He was misunderstood. He was not appreciated on Good Friday. There were hurtful words spoken on Good Friday to Jesus, hurtful actions, all these things, and yet He's still loved.
Yeah.
And I don't think many people think of marriage that way. They think of marriage, as like, oh, I finally found someone that's going to fulfill me. And yes, I'll lay down my life, Ephesians 5, and serve. But ultimately, I'm looking at this other person as someone that's going to fulfill me. Whereas if you look at marriage as the cross, right? And you look at the cross, like Jesus isn't up there going, oh, this is awesome, I'm living the dream. He's laying down a life, it hurts. But it's beautiful. That's what we're made for. We're made for that total self-giving.
Well, I always say that marriage is where bad people go to die. You can quote me, tweet that. Marriage is where bad people go to die to themselves in order to live in love.
Yeah.
Right? But I would say that, like as you're describing this, one of the critical virtues of marriage is hope. Because as you said, you get married and it's like, wait, I thought it would be, you guys, this is the reality, of course, especially with Catholics who have, if you've had great models of marriage in your life, sometimes you have the hardest time in those first months and years of marriage. Because it's like, no, I saw my parents as pros. Like my parents were professional lovers. They were incredible. The way my dad cared for my mom and the way my mom respected my dad, all these kind of things. And you remember them as, after having gone through all of those ups and downs, that then you find yourself in this marriage going like, oh, wait, we just stepped on each other's toes. You just stepped on my toes on purpose. Like all these kind of pieces to hold on to that virtue of hope. Because expectation, I always say expectation is a killer of joy. Future expectation ruins more present joy than anything else. I thought it would be like this, but it's not actually. It's like this instead. Anticipation is great because I love anticipation. That's why I don't like surprise parties. Like I like the idea of let me look forward to it because usually the actual thing is not as much fun as looking forward. Anyways, but expectation is I thought it would be like this. So marriage needs hope because once we get inside of it and realize, oh, this is not what I expected. But I still have hope that we can make it through this. I still have hope that this isn't the end just because we just hurt each other pretty badly here. This isn't the end just because, wow, we're really struggling uphill. Or even like you mentioned, it's so important to realize, I don't know, how many people here are discerning marriage actively right now, meaning you're in a relationship. And okay, great. One of the things I invite people to reflect on is the vows. So I, Jack, take you, Jill, to be my wife. I promise to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, to love you and honor you all the days of my life. And reflect on bad, and reflect on sickness, and reflect on the other one. Reflect on, how bad could it be? What if the other person gets sick and they can't take care of themselves? In our first summer, what if we can't get pregnant? What if we can't not get pregnant? What if I'm the one who's sick? I actually talk to people who say, I don't want him to stay with me if I'm the sick one. Because I don't want him to have to spend the rest of his life just caring for me.
Oh, like that movie. What was that movie?
And
You Before Me or something
like that? Yeah.
And
he's just like, yeah, but that's what you're saying yes to. That's what you're vowing, right? And that's why I think it's so important to say, okay, sometimes we are catastrophizers, right? We always think a worst case scenario. There's sometimes that's not healthy. This might be a case where it's really, really good to do. To actually do that out loud with them. Okay, what's the worst thing I can imagine happening in our marriage? Let's talk about that. Am I saying yes to that too? And not that I want that to happen, but like, let's bring it to the Lord. I failed and I wasn't faithful to you. Okay. Are we still one? You were faithful, unfaithful. Are we still one? We're sick. We have multiple children with multiple issues. What happens then? Not because we want to be negative Nellies, but because that's what life is. Remember, I think Bishop said it this morning. He said, life is hard, but there's hope. I love how Bishop this morning,
Yes.
I mean, I think my thing that resonated most with me was when he was so vulnerable,
Yes.
right? And he shared that he had to take time away from his diocese and had to get help. He had to seek help. It's just like, oh my gosh. Because what do we think about bishops? We're like, no, dude, they promote bishops because they don't struggle, because they don't get overwhelmed by stress, because they have everything under control. Here's a bishop in front of his brother bishops, in front of his brother priests, in front of all of us saying, actually, I needed time away. It wasn't like, I'm taking a sabbatical. He could have easily said that. He could have said, I just needed some time away to kind of collect myself. He said, no, I was so broken that this is what I needed. And if I didn't get it, I would have collapsed. And realize that could be your marriage. That could be my priesthood. And that could, because life is hard. Anyways, sorry.
Wow.
I'm just
This is
going on,
good
blah,
stuff.
blah, 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 blah.
So good.
I want to raise hands here. How many of you hope to be married someday? Let's see. Okay, so I want to ask you a question, Father, and you too, about what advice you would give to young people that hope to be married someday. They might not even be engaged or dating someone right now. But before we do that, I've got 2 announcements to make. First, I want to give a great thank you to Spoke Street Media. Let's give them a round of applause for sponsoring this broadcast booth here at SEEK23 and making this all possible. Also, if you want to check out this show, All Things Catholic, so this comes out every Tuesday, you can text All Things Catholic, just one word, to 33777, and you can get the podcast, you can get the show notes. It's basically that. In the podcast I do, All Things Catholic, I talk about the Bible, I talk about apologetics, marriage, like we're talking about here, or dating relationships, virtue, the saints, the spiritual life, prayer. So it's everything Catholic. Again, you could just text All Things Catholic, all one word, to 33777, and you could hear the podcast. Now, this is a special edition. We're going a little longer here. Normally, my podcast, people tell me they love it because it's only like 18 to 24 minutes. You can do it when you're going on a run or when you're on the exercise bike or you're running errands. So again, All Things Catholic, you can text that to 33777 if you're interested in that. But let's close with this topic for single people who that they want to be married someday. What advice would you give them to just, in their friendships, their relationships now? What can they be doing now to prepare for their future marriage? And I'll start with you, Beth.
2 things. We've had this conversation with our older children kind of out of nowhere. That's how my mom advice works, out of nowhere. Son, you need to make sure you know this. But 2 words, suffer well. Learn to suffer well. And what do I mean by that? That when things are hard, when things are challenging, when you'd rather not be in a situation or have to do something, to really just be in it, admit it's hard, but then press through. Because you're married, you have children, they need you in the middle of the night, and you're not going to want to get up. Your husband is sick, you're not going to want to help. You're not going to want to miss out on that party with your friends because kids at home are sick. So learn to suffer well and practice it often. I would also say, get to know yourself. Not like, oh, I liked my nails painted pink, or I like this particular latte. Like, no. Get to know your own story. Like, really take off your own personal way of seeing yourself now, but think about, okay, I have this maybe low T, small t, big T trauma in my past that I don't want to think about because it doesn't affect me now, right? But maybe take some time to really press into that, because that will be present in your marriage. It's not like you get married and you just drop all the stuff that you've packed down on the altar and you get to get out of jail free card. It's not like that at all. All of that stuff will come into your marriage. It will affect it. There's the verse in the Bible, love your neighbor as yourself. Many times we think about love your neighbor. Okay, got that, awesome. But to really love yourself, as that is that word as is the barometer of how you will love others. So if you don't really know yourself, if you're not curious about why am I feeling this way? Where did this come from? Why am I thinking these thoughts? How come no one else seems to struggle with this and I am? If you're not pondering that regularly and working to encounter yourself with Jesus and our Lord and help him to show you who you really are. Not who you think you are, but who you really are. And to get in touch with that and to really care for yourself, then you will have a greater capacity to love your spouse, to love your children, to love others. It's all beautifully contingent.
I think that's beautiful. I think to take that time, marriage will bring out all of our weaknesses, all of our sins, all of our imperfections, and it's beautiful. That's what the sacrament's doing. God wants to heal us, but he wants to heal us also at the deepest level, and that involves even our hurts, whatever false stories we tell ourselves. Those things are going to come up, and it is going to impact our ability to love our spouse and love our children. So you do yourself a service to get some of that work done, in spiritual direction, in prayer, reading, therapy if you needed. As you pointed out, Father Mike, we heard a bishop today talk about, I needed therapy. There's no shame in therapy. I know you always say only courageous people go deep with what they need to, in terms of facing the dark parts in their lives, to find the healing of Jesus Christ and his light there. So, great point there. Father, what would you say? What advice would you give young people here?
I've never actually said this. I'll say three things, just because they need to be balanced out with each other. The first thing is, what I've noticed in our culture, there's kind of a new... When I was going through college, it was just kind of automatic. People dated each other more regularly. They pursued relationships, and it seemed like people really cared about relationships. They wanted to have a relationship and actually went on dates, and then dated each other, and then got married. And I don't see that happening as much. It seems like young people who believe they're called to the vocation of marriage are like, I just kind of hope it happens. But I think there's got to be some kind of pursuit. Or at least some kind of, I'm actively open, if that's a better word to say it. I'm actively open. So there's something I'm doing about this. I find a lot of people who take their faith seriously have high standards. High standards are great. Don't compromise the standards. At the same time, we recognize that we have to be actively open. I'll say that, actively open. So what does that mean? Well, if it was someone who's discerning a call to religious life or to priesthood, that means I'm checking out seminaries. I'm checking out religious communities. I am talking with people. I'm actively pursuing this, even though if I'm not sure yet. There's no one there there's not a love connection yet. That's not a problem, but I'm actively open is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so that one, at the same time, to not allow your prayer to be dominated by discernment. I allowed my prayer for many years to be dominated by discernment, in the sense of every time I went to pray, every time I went to a retreat, every time I went to a conference like this, they didn't have the conferences like this, but every time I went to Mass, it was like, okay, God, what do you want me to do? Just, that's what I want. I don't care what else you give me. By the time I get to the end of this retreat or the end of this thing, I want my vocation. I want the answer. And so I get to the end of retreats and end of conferences, end of Mass, end of prayer, and still wouldn't know. And so, well, that was a waste. I didn't get what I wanted. So kind of spoiled brat, kind of but I want to Oompa Loompa now, Daddy. Like that kind of a situation where it was, I missed out on all the graces God was giving me. Every time you show up for prayer, God is giving you grace. Every time you show up for prayer, he's doing something in your hearts. But he didn't give me what I wanted. I wanted an answer. He wanted me to have him. So be actively open at the same time to not let discernment or pursuit of vocation be, that's not the end, that's not the fulfillment. You will never, ever, ever be fulfilled by your vocation. That's simply your path to get close to Jesus. But you can get close to Jesus even not in your vocation, or else you wouldn't be here right now. The last thing is, what do I do when I don't know? I'm actively open. I'm not letting it dominate my discernment, but dominate my prayer. So what do? I'd say don't panic. I remember there was a young man who, I knew him in college. He graduated college, went to seminary. After a little bit of time there, he left seminary, started dating someone, thought she's the one. She broke up with him, and he was like, no, what do I do? Because he's bopping around. He's like, I tried seminary. I tried this person I thought was going to be the love of my life, this whole kind of thing. And then he just calmed down and he said, okay, if God calls me to be a priest, I'm going to need to be a man of virtue. If God calls me to be a husband, I'm going to need to be a man of virtue. If God calls me to be a priest, I'm going to need to be a man who prays. If I'm going to call to be a husband and father, I need to be a man who prays. Nothing's keeping me from becoming a man of virtue now, because that's who I need to be, no matter what vocation I'm in. Nothing's keeping me from being a person of prayer now, because no matter what vocation I'm called to, that's the kind of person I need to be. And so to realize that every one of us, whether we know our vocation or don't, whether we're in a vocation or not, we all have to, whenever we show up, when we show up, we have to be a person of virtue. When we show up, we have to be a person of prayer. You don't have to wait to start being a person of virtue. You don't have to wait to be a person of prayer. But in fact, do your future self a big favor by becoming a person of virtue and a person of prayer now. So actively open. Don't let discernment dominate your prayer, but be a person of virtue now.
Do you know Father Mike's such a good teacher? I noticed this in your talk last night, but even here several times, he's so clear. And by the way, you talk at like 2.5 speed, like when I had to give a talk earlier yesterday, and they shortened my time by 15 minutes. It says I have to talk almost as fast as Father Mike to get it all in. but you're so good because you share. Here's the 3 things, and then you share it, and then you go back and you always repeat it. That's a great pedagogy.
So that's funny. That's funny you say that, because my older brother during COVID, we had online masses, and he was like, "Dude, why do you always repeat yourself? You said it, just leave it." I'm like, "Because you won't remember. What did I say, Mark?" He's like, "You said this." I'm like, "Yeah, because I said it 9 times. That's why you know."
Love it.
All right, I'll give my 2 points. Well, one of the points is something you always say, but then the one I was going to say was what the third point he ended with, which was grow in virtue. Yeah, I think that because you're going to use that in whatever vocation, as Father Mike said, and to learn about the virtues, and then try to live them in your friendships with your roommate, with your campus ministry on campus, with the people in your class, with your family back at home. Because the way you interact with the people in your community right now is the kind of way you're going to end up interacting with your future spouse. And so that's also a good thing as you're dating someone and you're observing, how does this guy treat his mom? How does he treat his brother? How does he treat his roommate? How does he treat his friends? Because that's how he's going to probably treat you. So it's good for you on your end to be working on virtue, particularly in your own community. But then the second point, maybe I'll let you take this one because you always like to talk about it, is Jesus is enough. To learn that right now, Jesus is enough. I alluded to earlier that many people today, I just want my vocation. Because I think they think a vocation it does something for me. Whereas a vocation is a calling to give yourself away, like Jesus did, whether that's to the priesthood, religious life, single life, or to the sacrament of holy matrimony. You're giving yourself away. And if I'm looking at this other person is going to make me happy, feel good about myself, make me not feel so alone, I'm looking at someone to fulfill my needs. That's really, that's a dangerous thing to bring into a marriage, no matter how much you love Jesus and do Bible studies and go to adoration. If you haven't really learned Jesus is enough, you'll turn to your spouse to try to have your spouse fulfill your needs, and that leads to a lot of challenges.
And then you start chasing other things. If your spouse isn't going to fulfill your needs, then maybe a new house or, all these other things. You keep kind of stockpiling all the things you're grasping for. So if you can actually just grasp for our Lord. There are so many times where I would love to be on the same page with my husband, and I'll make a bid and he will just, it goes over his head, and that can happen and I can get frustrated and we can get in a big fight about it. Or I could just be like, I love my husband, but Jesus, you're the one that fills my heart. You're the one that fills my needs. You're the one who knows me even better than my dear, darling husband. And so it's you that I turn to over and over again. It's you that are with me in all the chaos of our family life, my motherhood, and all the things that we're trying to do. And you know my heart, you see me, and just to rest in that. And it's something that is very much you continue to grow in over and over. And then there's even deeper ways that you meet him. But if you can just grasp onto that, if I can just grasp onto that, everything becomes still and clear.
Well, this has been such a fun conversation to have with both of you. Again, we want to thank the Spoke Street Media folks for hosting this here, and so great. I want to thank all of the students here at SEEK23. You're amazing. Your faith, your witness is so inspiring to all of us. We're praying we have a great conference here. Again, if you want to learn more about the podcast, you can text All Things Catholic to 33777, all one word, All Things Catholic to 33777, and dear wife, thank you for being on the show again. And Father Mike, we're so honored you're here, but so thankful for all that you do for the church, for the world, but most of all, as I said earlier, your fatherhood, you're living your vocation, that's what's most important. We're very grateful for that too.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much. All right, thanks for listening, everyone. God bless.
God bless you guys.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. For more information on the Focus Seek conference, visit seek.focus.org.
This episode of the SEEK23 podcast was produced by Spoke Street. For more great podcasts, visit spokestreet.com.